Well, good morning to you guys. It's so awesome once again just to see you here this morning and that we get to just be a church together and not just to do church, right? But to worship, and to be church, to be of one heart, to be of one mind, to be of one DNA as we get to raise our voices together and worship our amazing God. We get to kind of lay everything at His feet. But last week we got to kick off a new series, and we also got to have a lot of fun last week with Friend Day. And so, who just had a blast last week at Friend Day? Who had a great time? Who loved the Rip Your Floats? Who loved the T-shirts? Don't worry if you didn't get one. We'll make sure that we get you one. The T-shirts, the photo booth, right? If you haven't yet seen the pictures from the photo booth, make sure you check out on Facebook. We're not going to slideshow them here, but don't worry, we won't embarrass you that way. But check them out on Facebook. There's some silly, hilarious pictures on Facebook. I really encourage you to check those out in that way and just to laugh and to share them and just preview them. But and also do the jump castle. Last week was so exciting. But something pretty incredible last week happened, kind of an incredible milestone for us as a brand new church. Because last week was our 6-month birthday. We were exactly 24 weeks old. Woo! It's amazing. And so last week we celebrated 6 months. But also last week we had our very first service with over 100 people in attendance gathering together, which is incredible, you guys. Come on. Let's get up for God and what He's doing. That is incredible. I mean, for a church only 6 months old, for there to be 100 of us, there's 101 people, right? Thank you for that one person. Thank you. I love you so much. But there's 101 of us who rallied together last week, and it was incredible, right? That's our largest worship gathering that we've had as a new church family. It's an incredible milestone of what God is doing. I can't wait to see what the next 6 months look like because, I mean, we started off September 23rd, and there was only 45 of us. And it's incredible that last week we got to have 101 people together in this space. It was powerful, and it was awesome, and I loved every minute of it. I hope you did too. It was a lot of fun, especially the Rip Your Floats. I will admit, I love those. I had 4 of them, all right? I'm not ashamed. I had 4 Rip Your Floats. They were delicious, okay? But like I said earlier, last week we got to kick off a new series called Unlearning Religion. And it has been just a really great conversation that we've got to start having because we've been wrestling with this idea, right? We set ourselves up to think, what if all of what we've been taught about what it means to follow God, all the details, all the things that we kind of would dress, right, when we picture in our mind what it means to follow God. What if there were some things in that picture that were wrong? What if what we viewed, whether we are someone who's following Jesus or who isn't, when we picture what it means to follow God, what are some of the things that we would describe? How do we define it? What would we see? And are we right in all of that? Are we right? What if there's some things that we're missing? You see, last week we had this conversation that maybe for some of us, maybe for a lot of us, even when we stand back and we look at what it means to follow God, we hear these words about being in a relationship with Him, but really all we see is this religion about Him, right? And when we hear these words about freedom, but really all we see are these rules and restrictions, having to give up our fun, give up and sacrifice all these things that we really want to do. And we hear these words about purpose, right? How God has a purpose and a plan for our life, but really, from a distance, it really just looks so unsatisfying. It's something that we really don't want to follow or to walk in at all. It was a great conversation we got to have last week because we realized, you guys can remember, we realize that maybe we see these things because we're standing at a distance from God. We're standing at arm's length from Him, and we're unwilling to get close. And it's because we're unwilling to get close, that's all we see. Remember, we talked about how at my grandparents' house there was this bowl of fruit in the living room on the coffee table. Remember that? And I said, as a kid, I go into my grandparents' house, I see this bowl of fruit, and from a distance, right, that fruit looked so delicious. Woo! I just want to go up and take a bite. But then as I got closer, I realized that, this is fake. Like, what? Like, why are they playing this trick on me as a kid? What if what we think we see and what we think is real and true about following God from a distance is wrong? Then we experience the fullness of what He has for us if we decide to put on our walls and are willing to walk closer with Him. It was a wonderful conversation we had last week, and I'm excited to dive in today because there's a particular habit that I want us to kind of lean in and to focus on. There's this habit that is super easy for us to kind of point at in other people, right? It's super easy for us to identify in other people's behavior, but it's almost impossible for us to be willing to hold up a mirror and look at our own hearts, or to look at our own lives and how we live every single day. There's this particular behavior that many of us kind of, maybe sometimes when we feel like we're getting far with God or we feel like we've arrived in our faith, we start to develop this behavior, this attitude, and it even kind of comes up into the scene earlier on, whether we're in faith or we're not. But in life, we start to embody this attitude and this spirit, this behavior that deteriorates our relationships, that hurts us and doesn't benefit us in any single way. And we feel like maybe these behaviors are right, this attitude is correct, but really it's preventing us from walking in the fullness of what God is dreaming for us to walk in. See, Jesus talks about this behavior in Matthew chapter 7. If you have a Bible, I really encourage you to have it here in front of me. We have some Bibles in the seats. I also really want to encourage you to use the YouVersion Bible app. If you really love taking notes during our conversation, here's kind of a quick, 5-point instructions on how to take notes during our time together on your phone, and make sure you click save at the very end of our time together so that those notes are saved and you can look back on them in the future. This is an amazing tool, and I really encourage you to take advantage of it. But we're in Matthew chapter 7. Trey, go ahead and leave that up for just a second. But we're in Matthew chapter 7. We're going to read verses 1 to 6. And it's in this moment where Jesus is actually on the side of this mountain. He's preaching to hundreds, if not thousands of people, this incredible message. And he says lots of things. But in this moment that we're going to read, he leans into a very specific behavior, very specific and particular attitude. And I'm excited for us to read it. So Matthew chapter 7, verse 1. Go ahead and throw it up on the screen. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. Wow. Just pause there for a moment. This particular habit, do not judge, right? I mean, in our culture, we have this constant thing that we're always kind of saying with people, like, don't judge me, right? Have you ever had that kind of moment, maybe with your spouse or with a friend? Don't judge me, right? And so one of my favorite foods, it's a little expensive, and so I don't really get to eat it too often when Aaron and I go out, but one of my favorite foods, it's not lobster, it's not some, big old steak, but it's actually movie theater popcorn, right? Movie theater popcorn, right? You pay $13, $15 for this huge bucket, and it's one of my favorite foods, and every time we go to the movie theater, I don't always indulge and get this giant bucket, right? But I love getting movie theater popcorn. It's my favorite, and I love going up to the butter machine, right? You guys know what I'm talking about, and just dumping, right? I'm one of those people who will stand there for a long time and I'm making sure every kernel gets some, right? I don't want to eat the top layer and then everything underneath is gone. I'm making sure every piece, right? One of my life goals one day is I'd love to have one of these butter machines in my house. That would be incredible. Oh, my word, that would be awesome. Put it on everything, right? Make some mashed potatoes, perfect, right? PB&J, perfect, maybe not. But, right, I just soak it. And every time, too, I always look at Aaron. I'm like, Aaron, don't judge me, right? I look at my wife, and she's staring at me like, oh, my word. Like, that's so disgusting. I'm like, don't judge me, right? This is my favorite thing. I love this food, right? And then, of course, I'm one of those people who, I'm going to make sure I eat the entire bucket because you get that one free refill. And I'm getting my money's worth, right? I'm one of those people, right? So I make sure I eat the whole bucket, and then I'll eat the whole next bucket, too. And so just the whole time she's looking at me, she'll get a few kernels, and she's like, Aaron, don't judge me, right? We say that all the time. Don't judge me. Don't judge me. I mean, even people who aren't even Christians say that, right? Don't judge me all the time. And even people who aren't even a part of church would say, doesn't your Bible, doesn't your God tell you not to judge people, right? They're teaching God's words back to us. It's crazy. But all the time they say, don't judge me. No one loves feeling judged. Don't judge me. In this moment, let's really come to terms with what Jesus is trying to have us understand. He says, do not judge or you too will be judged. Verse 2. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Verse 6, right at the end. Do not give to dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. What an odd moment that is. Jesus starts talking about judging, and then he says these dogs and these pigs. It's kind of odd. But in this moment, you see, Jesus, he teaches a lot. I mean, if you read through the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you see that Jesus teaches so much and on so many different topics and different occasions. And sometimes he uses these parables, he uses these allegories to teach a certain lesson. But in this moment, he gets straight to the point. And I believe it's because he really wants people to get to the grip of what he's wanting them to understand, because their culture had twisted, had completely perverted what God intended for them to be like. You see, this Matthew 7 kind of context is kind of couched towards the end of this Sermon on the Mount moment. And it starts in Matthew 5 and goes to Matthew 7. And this is kind of like the starting point, right? This is the launch pad of Jesus' ministry. As he's about to head out into 3 years and travel all around, preaching, teaching, healing people, do all these incredible things. And then at the end of that 3 years, he's arrested and nailed to a cross. And then he rises to the dead. So this is the launch pad of this moment. He speaks this message on do not judge. And he was addressing a very particular problem issue that their culture had abused and misused. You see, these religious leaders, they are called the Pharisees, right? These people who God had given responsibility to instruct, to lead people in knowing the law, right? The law, what's in the Old Testament, that people would adhere to, the 10 Commandments that people would follow, all the other rules and guidelines that he had given them in the Old Testament. And he said, listen, this is your responsibility. Make sure that generation after generation after generation that make sure you're raising people up who would be Pharisees, who would be these religious leaders that help keep people on a straight path. And so people were groomed from childhood to be these religious leaders. And God had set the bar. I mean, think of the sport of pole vaulting, right? When you see people in this track and field sport, when they have these giant sticks, and maybe not sticks, but poles, and they run down, right? That's me running. And they just like put in that little hole in the ground, and they just throw themselves up into the air, right? I mean, they go so high. It's incredible to watch. And they just barely just glide right over the pole. Imagine, right? I mean, God set this bar, and it was hard. But with some self-discipline and very intentional focus, people could clear the bar. And if they didn't, God had set up the sacrificial system for them to be able to be made new and be reconciled to God. But God gave them this bar that they could clear. And then what happened is the Pharisees took that and they raised it. They raised it to a height that no one could soar over. Not a single person. Not even themselves. They added on all of these rules and restrictions. They even had this one rule that on the Sabbath day, there are only so many steps that you could take in the entire day, right? I have no idea what the number was, but as you're going around through the day, you're keeping track, and you're like, that was it. I got 3 more steps until my bed for the night. What do? Right, do I try to jump? I mean, they were very critical. They were you have to follow all of these rules, and they added hundreds and hundreds and hundreds to on top of this. They took this beautiful thing that God had given them, this bar for how people should live, and they raised it. And then what they did, they couldn't even clear it themselves, and so they stood next to it, and they just laughed at people as they failed, person after person. They'd point it out and say, "Hi, you did this wrong. You couldn't do this. You're not good enough. You'll never be good enough." Over and over and over again. And they had perverted what God had given. This beautiful thing that God had given, they perverted and twisted it. They had taken all of these wonderful guidelines that God had given them and been into a bunch of these rules, and they added all these things on top, and they made it their mission, they made it their obligation to make sure that they were religious judges who would condemn the insufficiencies in people's lives. Now, friends, call me crazy. I think many of us in the church have adopted a very similar mindset and critical spirit. I mean, maybe even a part of your story of faith is that there was a time when you walked into a church and people judged you up and down. You hated the church for it. You hated Christians for it. In our culture where we're able to review and rate and critique everything, where when we buy something on Amazon, we get an email from the seller asking us to rate their product and to rate their service. I mean, in our culture where we're able to write Google reviews on restaurants and we're able to write reviews on Rotten Tomatoes about movies that we see, we're able to write reviews about so many things in life. Everything we're able to critique and to review and to kind of put our opinion out there, especially on Facebook, a terrible platform to use. But people, they blast their opinion across without even caring how it impacts other people. But in our culture where we feel so entitled to share our opinion and share our review and our critique, we've kind of created and stirred up this critical spirit, this same spirit that was existing within the Pharisees of how they would judge and condemn and look down at other people and criticize them for not being good enough. Hear me, friends. Within the church, we have created a culture and created a religion where people are not good enough, where you don't meet my standards. And when people look at the church from the outside, they say, wow, what a bunch of judgmental people. And this is a human problem. Because even as people, we create these expectations of others, and when we don't meet them, we are disappointed. We create these expectations within our marriage, and when our spouse doesn't meet it, we get upset. Oh, I thought you were doing the dishwasher. We create these expectations of our kids with all this pressure. And we get frustrated if they can't live up to the expectations. And in our culture of having this critical spirit and this critical attitude, we've allowed ourselves to have this self-righteous position where we can create a bar for other people that we ourselves don't even have to live by. We can tell our kids, hey, don't curse, don't steal, and make sure you're nice to people. But then what do they see us doing? They see us cursing at people in traffic when they cut us off. They see us taking product from home that our boss did not give us. They see us being lazy and kind of being slow to clock out and kind of steal that extra money from our employers. And they see us write things on Facebook that are super mean and extremely critical. Or they even see us when we're standing in line about to order at Chick-fil-A or McDonald's. We see them express our frustration and our anger at the person who's taking our order because I've had to wait so long. I mean, we set these expectations for other people to live by, but we ourselves do a very bad job at following them. Hear me. Listen. I mean, hold up a mirror for a moment and look within what you was happening and how we were being critical people with this spirit of being assuming about other people and expecting the worst and looking down on people and how they live and their lifestyles, and we get so judgmental even for people who are living different lifestyles than our own, and we get critical towards them, get angry with them. Maybe because they vote for a different candidate or because they have a certain flag out in the front yard. We get mad and we get upset with them. And we think less of them as a person. Hear me, folks. We think less of them as a person. And that's the judgmental attitude that's stirring around inside of us. And just look within your heart for a moment. I mean, I could be wrong. But I know that God is revealing a lot of things even within me. And so I encourage you, even in our conversation this morning, would you be asking God in the back of your mind, God, would you reveal things about who I am? Because it's not okay. Hurts, doesn't it? When people do it to us. We don't like it. We get upset by it. Or if there are ways that we are doing it to other people. Maybe it's when we see people of a certain racial group. We feel uneasy. Because of the stereotypes that our culture has created. We're judging and assuming in that way. Maybe it's when we see people driving a beater or wearing raggedy clothes. We assume things about them. Friends, this attitude is very real. God is dreaming for us to unlearn it. Friends, He's dreaming for us to unlearn our critical attitude. As He's saying, listen, as He's saying to us, look within yourself. Look within the sawdust of your own eye, or the 2x4 in your own eye. Listen, look at yourself and how you live. See, friends, the first thing that God really wants us to uncover and understand is that in our relationship with Jesus, we have to unlearn this critical attitude. We have to unlearn it. You see, friends, there are two things that really begin to cultivate and stir up this critical attitude. This first thing is when we are blind to ourselves and we become deaf to God. The second thing is also that we become harder on others and we become softer on ourselves. And these two causes, being blind to self, deaf to God, and harder on others, softer on self. You see that first, it's so crucial. I mean, friends, Trey, if we put up our next slide of these two causes that lead us into having these critical spirits. You see, friends, we so often tend to be blind to our own behavior and be closed off from seeing ourselves and the ways that we treat other people. We become so ignorant to the ways in which we place expectations on others, and we ourselves don't even live up to them. And we become closed off from hearing God's voice and His thoughts on how it is that we live. And friends, we cannot continue to be blind to the things that we're doing. I mean, one of the crucial parts of our journey of faith is that we're constantly asking God, would you convict me of the sin that's in my life that I don't even see? It's one of the most essential things that we do in our journey with Christ. Doesn't matter where we're at or we feel like we're at, is essential that every single day, God, it's been a while since I've felt convicted. God, would you show me what's inside and how I live? God, would you show me what I'm so blind to seeing? And would you speak? Would you break down these walls that I'm ignoring you and I'm shutting out your voice? God, would you speak when I hear you? Would you tell me what I'm doing? Would you speak to me? See, conviction is something that we've kind of associated with this negative connotation. You see, I mean, the reason behind why we are convicted maybe aren't good reasons, but conviction itself is a very good thing because it is God showing us grace, and it's God being willing being willing to speak to our hard hearts and to let us know we did something wrong. Because God doesn't have to. He can just dust his hands and say, I want nothing to do with you now. He could do that, but he doesn't. He lets us know when we're wrong. And friends, we can't lean away from that conviction. We have to lean into it. Lean into what he's telling us, and we have to be asking him, listen, God, what am I doing? What am I doing that's wrong? What am I doing that you're wanting me to do different as a husband, as a dad, as a wife, as a mom, as an employee, as a leader, as a business owner, as whatever role we get to walk in every single day. God, what am I doing that you would want me to do differently? Friends, we have to be begging and asking for God to open our eyes to how we live and to turn on our ears to hear his voice. And friends, we have to stop being harder on other people, and we have to start being softer towards others and harder towards ourselves. There are too many days. There are too many days where I've come home from work and I've been hard on my wife for not having the house clean or dinner ready. There are too many days where I've been harder on my wife than I have been on myself. I regret that. We need to be harder on ourselves and be quick to give grace and to understand and be softer on other people, because, listen, this spirit of criticism will destroy our marriage. If you're feeling this distance between you and your spouse beginning to grow and to widen, do you have a critical spirit? Maybe between you and your friends, do you find it hard to have friends? They don't seem to stick around for long. Do you have too much of a critical spirit towards them? And they're just wanting to ignore you and blow you off because they don't want to spend time with you because you are so judgmental and you criticize so much towards them or even towards other people. Friends, this attitude of criticism and self-righteousness, it deteriorates and destroys our relationships around us because we are so much harder on other people. And we're not hard on ourselves at all. We need to reverse those things and begin being harder on ourselves, being more strict on the ways that we live and the habits that we have and the things that we say and the expectations that we hold for ourselves, and being softer towards other people. We have to begin unlearning this critical attitude that we've developed and that we've built. And it's very important that we begin learning to love people well. See, friends, what happens just earlier before this in Matthew chapter 5, you see, like I said, Matthew chapter 7 is kind of towards the end of the Sermon on the Mount when Jesus is preaching this big old message, and it's incredible. I really encourage you, even if you're needing something to read, to study the Sermon on the Mount. It begins with the Beatitudes. Maybe you might be a little familiar with that in Matthew chapter 5, but read all the way through into the end of chapter 7. It's incredible what Jesus teaches. But in chapter 5, there's something that he says on the way in which we should treat other people who are all around us. He says this in Matthew 5, 43 to 45. Trey, mind if we throw this on the screen so people can follow along? But Matthew chapter 5, verses 43 to 45. He says, "You have heard it, that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven." In this moment when Jesus says, hey, listen, make sure you're loving your enemies, you see, many of us, when we read that, we think of people who are enemies who are overseas in North Korea or Muslims in the Middle East. We immediately point those things out in our minds. Oh, those are my enemies, and maybe there's a difficulty inside of us to love them or to even think of doing that. But even beyond that idea of what it means to love our enemies, Jesus is saying, listen, I mean, the very same way that he's pointing this behavior out in people who were there in that moment, in that culture, thousands of years ago. Because to them, their enemies were people who lived life different than them. That the way that the Hebrews and the Israelites, they saw people who did not share their same worldview as their enemy, as threats to their way of life. They saw those others as their enemy, even if people were nice to them. If you are not like me, you're my enemy. So friends, in the very same way, God is telling us to love people who are different than us, because it's so easy to love people who are exactly like us, who have the same hobbies, the same interests, the same status in the socioeconomic spectrum, the same everything, the same neighborhood, the same kind of car, the same job, the same income level, the same everything. It's so easy to kind of couch ourselves in those pockets in life and never get out of them. But God's saying, listen, love people who are different than you. Don't tolerate them. Love people who are not the same as you. People have different views. People have different values. People who look different than you, have a totally different culture and background than you. Love them. People have a different lifestyle. Love them. You may see them as people who you want nothing to do. You want to keep them at a distance. God is saying, listen, bring them close to you just as I have brought you close to me. You know, in Romans chapter 5, get this. Romans chapter 5, God tells us that we were his enemy before we came to know Christ. Romans chapter 5. The Bible tells us that we are all enemies of God before we give our lives to Jesus. Wow. That I used to be an enemy of God for so many years. That I was an enemy of God longer than I have been a friend of God. How God has brought me close to his heart, and how he has loved me in ways that I don't deserve. You see, friends, this kind of love that God is telling us to do is, it doesn't worry about ever being paid back. It doesn't worry about it being convenient or easy. It doesn't worry about it ever being returned or the same love being returned back to them. It doesn't matter what the status of what the other person does for us. This kind of love is selfless and caring and compassionate. It doesn't matter about whatever we get in return that we would ever benefit from it. But this kind of love looks beyond our own needs and cares more for the other person's. This kind of love cares more about the other person's condition than our own. This kind of love cares more for the other person's feelings than our own. God's telling us to love people well. And you know what's crazy? Is that towards the end of that moment in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus says this. He says, be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Be perfect in how you love people. Love people well. It's hard and difficult, but love people well. We need to learn to love people well. Even if they dress differently, look differently, live in a part of town that I would never go to. Love them well. You care for them. That means having meaningful conversations. That means smiling and giving a hug or a handshake. That means inviting over for dinner. That means, offering help wherever you can. That means praying for and encouraging and lifting up, not gossiping about. To love people well. Because here's what's happened is, in the culture of our world, people just see the church as these judgmental backseat drivers. Who here loves backseat drivers? Nobody. That's why we call them backseat drivers. Because you keep your attitude and your opinions in the backseat, not up here with me. Whenever Aaron and I go on long road trips, which we love going on long road trips, don't get me wrong, but normally I always have to like put in earbuds when we drive. Like, especially if it's a long drive, I put in earbuds. I listen to an audiobook, listen to music, whatever, because I know if I don't, we'll have some like great conversation, don't get me wrong, but then I'll also be hearing, Andre, you're going too fast. Yes, dear. Andre, you forgot to turn on your turn signals 5 seconds before you change lanes. Oh, thank you, Aaron. Thank you, sweetheart. You are amazing. Thank you for being my helper in the car. Thank you. Right? Thank you for your ideas. Oh, Andre, don't just slow down a little more. Maybe easier on the brake. Oh, you got it, babe. You got it, sweetheart. Put the earbuds in. In the world today, the church has become so good at being judgmental that the world around us has put their earbuds in and has tuned us out. And I get it. But there's something so very valuable that God is wanting us to share with the world. But they're not going to listen if we're just these bunch of backseat drivers. We have to love people well. Through encouragement, through positive attitude, through genuinely caring for them. And then we get to embrace our true role in the world. And that is not to stand next to the bar and judge people when they can't get over it, but that is to introduce them to the one who can lift them up over the bar. Friends, because Jesus wants to lift people up over this bar. The same bar that we tend to stand next to and judge people on and look down on people for not meeting these expectations, these rules. God wants us to encourage them and to invite them and to introduce them to the one who will make them new. The one who will get them off this cycle of bad decisions and poor behavior and in a lifestyle that is not fulfilling, that does not honor God. Because we ourselves can't change people. God is the one who changes people because we ourselves are in progress being changed, right? Remember when Aaron and I used to live in the upstate, there's this gas station type, grocery store combo that I'd go to pretty often. And I was blown away, right? Every time I'd go into this place, the same section of shelves was a huge mess, and there's this big sign on it that says, sorry for the inconvenience, updates in progress. And we were there for years, and it never changed. Oh my goodness. What are these updates? You're just building a whole new building, right? Is that what you're doing? But it never changed. See, friends, for all of us in the room, those of us who have and are pursuing a relationship with Christ, we are works in progress ourselves, and we should be changing. We should be growing. We should be pulling the 2x4 out of our own eyes in the middle of encouraging people to see the sawdust in their own and introducing them to the one who can change and transform their whole life. I mean, get that imagery that Jesus says, pull the 2x4 out of your own head. I mean, you'd be dead if that was real. Could you imagine 2x4 if someone walked in here? You'd be like, oh my word, how is this person still alive? I get that it's figurative, but it's the reality that there's so much within our own self that God is wanting to change. And so are we putting ourselves in position to be changed? And are we introducing him to the one who says, listen, don't be like me, be like Jesus. Because what happens in our walk with Christ is that he gives us a new name tag, right? I mean, picture someone who's dressed, right? Who's kind of standing there, they got some clothes on. And then God, what happens is when they give their life to Christ, he slaps a new name tag on them and says, child of God. You're no longer lost. You are now found. You are mine, right? He slaps a new name tag on them, and then over time, he changes their outfit so they look like Jesus. And the same is true for us. We need to be introducing people to the one who lifts them over the bar, the one who completely transforms and changes their life. Dear friends, I'm excited just that in 4 weeks, we'll get to have our very first Easter service together. And I can't wait. I mean, Friend Day last week was fantastic with all the people that God brought together. And I can't wait for Easter, because Easter is this natural time in our culture's calendar where people begin thinking about church. Maybe I'll go to church with my grandparents or my parents or whatever. This natural time of the year that something begins to spark inside of people. And we as a new church here in our community, we want to let everyone know that we're here to love them and not to judge them. You see, we actually have this crazy and ambitious dream over the course of these three Saturdays. Trey, can we put up one of our slides here with the dates on it of inviting our city? You see, on these 3 Saturdays, April 6th, April 13th, and April 20th, we're going to meet here at the school at 9 o'clock, and we're going to head out into our community, and we're going to use door invites and go into as many houses as we can to invite them to our church, this space where they won't be judged, but they will be loved, and they can maybe enter into a time of getting to connect with God that will radically change their life. You see, we had this ambitious goal of inviting 5,000 households in Moncks Corner. It's crazy, but I know we can do it. 5,000 people. So I encourage you, be a part of all 3 of these Saturdays, 1 or 2 of them, whatever you can do, but be a part of these 3 Saturdays. It is going to be exciting, and usually, every Saturday too, when we're done canvassing, when we're done putting out door invites, we always go to Chick-fil-A. Woo woo! Chick-fil-A! And get lunch. I can't wait, but look forward to this. This is fun and exciting, and it's amazing to see what God does with just a small piece of paper. And how even many of your families are a part of this church because of these small pieces of paper. Imagine what God will do when we put out 5,000 of them in our neighborhoods, in our streets, in our community. Imagine what God will do for Easter. Not just about getting a big crowd. Hear me. It's not just about getting a big crowd and seeing this room filled and saying, oh yeah, wasn't that good? No, it's about how many more people can be in a space to meet with God and change them. How many people can we see enter into a moment with this God who they believe who hates them or judges them or wants to condemn them and smite them off this world? How many people can we see enter into a moment where they realize that God loves them and can change them and bless them and lead them into a whole new life where they're given a new identity and purpose and true authentic freedom? Imagine what God will do. And you see, our Easter series is going to be this. It's going to be You Are Loved. Because we want to shout from the rooftops that we are not here to judge you. No, we are here to love you. We're here to love our city in radical ways. You are loved. That we love you. God loves you. God has more for you than He wants from you. You are loved. I can't wait to see what God does. And all of our effort and our energy that we put into inviting our community. Not just to have a big surface, but for God to do big things in people's hearts. Imagine what God will do. I can't wait for this time. But friends, I want to encourage you. May we start to unlearn our critical spirit. Would we start to shake off this self-righteousness of setting expectations that are too high for other people to follow and not be hypocrites? Would we be softer towards others and harder on ourselves? Would we open our eyes and see how we're living? And would we open our ears to God's thoughts and to His voice? Would we unlearn our critical spirit? Would we begin to learn to love people well, to love those who are different from us? That wherever we go, whether it's Lowe's to get some tools to do a little remodel at the house, or maybe it's to the gas station to get some fuel, or maybe it's to Walmart to get some groceries. Whatever where we go, would we love people well? Would it be through smiling, through hugging, through every means possible? Could we love people well? Could we let them know that we care about them? And really take an investment in their life and be an encouragement to them. And whenever they feel down, kind of help them be picked back up. Would we pray for people? We would love people well. Build friendships that are meaningful. Would we love people well? And friends, would we embrace our true role as God's people to introduce them to the one who lifts them over the bar, to the one who will radically change their life, to lead them into a greater purpose than what they even can understand, what he's doing for all of us. Will we be used in such a way in all of our circles of influence in life, in work, within our extended family, within school, and our sports teams? Would God use us in such a way to truly be a light in this world and to love people well and let them know that the one who made them loves them? Would you pray with me?